Let's talk about true financial independence. And to do that, I want to introduce you to Maya. Maya was a hospital pharmacist who walked out of her last shift at age 41. She wasn't fired, and honestly, she wasn't even burned out. She just literally didn't need the paycheck anymore. And the wildest part? She didn't get there through a massive inheritance, and she didn't win the lottery. She did it by mastering the mechanics of compounding, time, and absolute discipline.
Okay, picture this. It's the day Maya graduated from pharmacy school, and her financial picture is pretty bleak. She's sitting on $60,000 in crushing student debt, and she has exactly $340 to her name in checking. Coming from a hardworking family where money was always tight and investing was just completely unheard of, she had zero roadmap to follow. So, staring down this massive mountain of debt and her tiny bank balance, this heavy, burning question just kept keeping her up at night. If I just keep doing this, working shift after grueling shift, will I ever actually be free?
That brings us right into stage one, getting the machine running, taking Maya from $0 to her very first $20,000.
Since Maya couldn't rely on her parents for financial advice, her very first real lesson came from an older coworker named Priya in the pharmacy break room. Priya shared this incredibly simple but profound habit. She said, before rent, before groceries, the moment my paycheck lands, a chunk of it moves into an investment account. Automatically. I never see it, so I never miss it. This was a total light bulb moment for Maya. It shifted her whole mindset. Money stopped being just the scraps left over at the end of the month, and instead became what she proactively decided to keep for herself. So she took the leap and started automatically saving 10% of her income before she could even touch it.
Now, you might be thinking she got it all perfectly right from day one, but that's not the case. Like a lot of beginners, she really wanted to skip ahead to the finish line. She took $2,000, which was nearly half of her entire life savings at the time, and threw it all into a hyped-up mining stock a friend told her about. 6 weeks later, poof, it had evaporated down to just $700. It hurt, but because she was young and her overall capital was still pretty small, it ended up being a relatively cheap lesson to learn early on.
And that painful burn planted a permanent rule in her mind: speculation versus investing. They are two entirely different activities. She realized right then and there that she had to separate the pure adrenaline rush of speculation from the boring, steady discipline of true investing. Watching that hard-earned money just vanish completely cured her of ever chasing hot stock tips again. And by just keeping her head down, saving her wages, and learning from that one sting, she crossed the $20,000 mark just 2 years later.
Which leads perfectly into stage 2, where compounding starts to matter. This covers her journey from $20,000 to $100,000.
So, by age 27, Maya faces a huge temptation. Her parents genuinely want to help, and they offer to pitch in for a down payment on a condo. Sounds great, right? But to pull it off, Maya would have to drain a massive chunk of her invested savings. She came incredibly close to saying yes, but then she remembered a core concept from a book she had picked up: the first rule of compounding. Do not interrupt it unless you absolutely have to. She realized that pulling that money out meant sacrificing years, maybe decades, of future compound growth for a condo she didn't honestly need quite yet. It took serious restraint, but she thanked her parents and walked away from the offer.
Instead of buying the condo, she locked in on these stage 2 fundamentals. First, as we just saw, she refused to interrupt the compounding machine. Second, she started taking investing a bit more seriously by learning some basic business analysis. She wasn't trying to be a Wall Street wizard. She literally just read annual reports so she wouldn't overpay for perfectly normal businesses. And third, she focused on protecting her downside. Right around this time, she met her partner, Jonah. Moving in together meant their combined expenses dropped, which naturally and almost effortlessly pushed Maya's savings rate even higher. And what was the result of all this boring consistency? Just before she turned 30, at age 29, she officially hit the $100,000 mark. No viral startup investments, no crypto booms. It was driven entirely by a rising salary, highly disciplined saving, and completely average market returns. She didn't chase a single trend, she just let the machine do its job.
But here is where the story gets really interesting. Stage 3, the long, uneven middle, navigating the climb from $100,000 all the way to $1 million.
I call this the psychologically difficult phase, because this is where your patience gets tested to the absolute limit. Enter Maya's old friend Devin. Devin worked in venture capital and tossed 30 grand into a pre-IPO startup. The company went public, and boom, Devin's stake was suddenly worth over $1 million overnight. Now, Maya had actually been invited to invest in that same startup, but because the underlying numbers weren't really there, she stuck to her rules and only put in a tiny token amount just to stay curious. That small bet grew to $18,000, Nice, sure, but nothing compared to Devon. And man, that is a brutal reminder of how tempting it is to abandon your careful system when you see someone else getting fabulously rich off a lucky gamble.
And if watching her friend become an overnight millionaire wasn't tough enough, reality came knocking when Maya turned 31. The market crashed, hard. It dropped by more than 40% in just 1 year. Think about the emotional toll of that for a second. On paper, years of Maya's incredibly hard-earned progress were just wiped out, pushing her right back below that huge $100,000 milestone she had celebrated.
So, what did she do? Well, her response to this crash is the exact reason she's free today. First off, she did not panic. She knew financial history, so she expected this to happen eventually. Second, she kept contributing on her exact same automated schedule, didn't touch a thing. And third, she actually found a way to squeeze her budget to invest a little bit more into those solid companies that were suddenly trading on sale. Because she didn't flinch and run for cash, when the market inevitably recovered, her portfolio shot up faster than it ever had before.
By age 33, Maya and Jonah did eventually decide to buy a house. And yes, making that down payment put a very real, very heavy dent into her portfolio. But this perfectly shows how her understanding of wealth had evolved. Interrupting compounding is totally acceptable as long as it's a deliberate choice for something deeply meaningful, like family stability. It was a carefully calculated trade-off for her actual life, not some careless financial mistake.
And that finally brings us to Stage 4 financial freedom, crossing the $1 million mark.
Shortly before turning 41, Maya's portfolio officially crossed 7 figures, and she confidently walked away from her demanding pharmacy job entirely on her own terms. But how did the math actually work out? Well, more than half of her final $1 million came purely from investment growth, not her actual paycheck contributions. In those later years, the market itself was doing way more of the heavy lifting than her own physical labor ever could. That is the absolute magic of the machine she spent decades building.
But you're probably wondering, whatever happened to Devon, the guy who made $1 million overnight? Well, he kept looking for the next massive payout, chasing stocks he thought would multiply 30 times in value. Instead, he found a whole lot of zeros. Because his wealth was built entirely on high-risk speculation rather than a solid, sustainable system, his fortune just evaporated through a string of bad bets. Today, he's back grinding away at his old firm, ironically further away from retirement than he was the day that startup went public.
When we zoom out and look at Maya's timeline, it is just an incredible sequential journey. She starts at age 24 with a net worth of zero, actually negative 60,000 if we're being precise. By 27, she claws her way to 20 grand. By 29, she crosses into 6 figures. At 31, she stares down a massive 40% market crash without blinking, and by 41, she hits $1 million and retires to tutor and play the piano. It's not magic, it's a process.
So, bringing it all together, what is the real formula for wealth that we can take away from this explainer? It's simple. You absolutely do not need genius-level insight. You just need to form those automated saving habits early. You have to practice immense patience through that long, boring middle phase. You need to maintain ironclad discipline when the market inevitably drops. And honestly, perhaps the hardest part, you have to ignore someone else's exciting, lucky story. Financial freedom isn't about luck for most of us. It is the product of steady automation, emotional restraint, and simply letting time do all the heavy lifting.
Which leaves us with one really important question to consider today. Are you actively building a machine for your own freedom, or are you just sitting around waiting for a lucky break? Take a hard look at the financial habits you're forming right now, and ask yourself whether they're setting you up to be Maya or Devon. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I will catch you in the next one.